Hey guys, if you are watching this video, that means there's a good chance that you have either recently come into some assets or you're getting ready to inherit some assets and you're not really sure where to start. This is very common, and I wanted to put this video together to show you the 6 steps that my firm, Nexus Wealth Management, takes when we have clients come in who are in this situation. Now, what I've seen in my nearly 17 years in the financial services industry, having worked with over 700 households, dozens of those being people in this exact situation, is that it can be a little overwhelming. There's so many moving parts, and for someone who's never navigated this before, it could seem like, where do I even start? So what I want to do today is I want to show you the 6 steps that my team follows with every client that we're working with to make sure this is a smooth process. That way, regardless of if you are handling it by yourself or you're working with an advisor or an attorney, you know what you should be doing, you have a little bit more knowledge, and you can make decisions with all the facts versus partial facts. So let's get into step 1. Step 1 is that you're going to want to verify the asset titles and beneficiary designations. What this means is you're going to want to start by confirming that you are in fact the rightful beneficiary, and you're also going to want to verify how these assets are titled. How you're going to want to start this is you're going to want to gather all the documents associated with the assets you're going to be inherited. So if this is through someone passing away, you're going to want a copy of their will. If they have a trust, you're going to want any deeds, you're going to want any statements. These are things that you can handle alone or with an attorney, but it's very, very important that you start by gathering these. Now, if you are getting these assets in the form of a settlement or maybe through a divorce, as a divorce, you're going to want what's known as a quadro, QDRO. And if it's a settlement, most likely not a whole lot you have to worry about. They're probably just going to be transferring those assets directly to you. You're also going to want to verify, like I said, the title. So this means that titles could be something like a joint tenancy, so like a joint tenants with rights of survivorship. That just means that the assets are going to transfer directly to the beneficiary and they're going to avoid probate. It might be something like a tenancy in common where there's separate shares and it may not automatically transfer. These things are really important because when you know how the assets are titled and you have all the supporting documents, it makes moving the assets very easy, which we're going to talk about a little bit further down the road. Now, if you're working with the trust, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the trust documents. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. Reach out to my team, reach out to your advisor, or reach out to an attorney. They can help you do all that. In addition, you're also going to want to notate if you're inheriting any IRAs or any life insurance. Again, we're going to go into what all these things mean a little bit further down the road, but just having these organized is going to make things very, very simple as we get to that next step. Hey guys, if you've made it this far, maybe take a second to hit that like button. It does help a ton. Now, once you have all these documents, you may be wondering what happens next. Well, it's going to depend on if these assets have to go through probate or they do not have to go through probate. What probate is, it's the legal process of where a judge is deciding how assets need to be dispersed to a deceased beneficiary. Now, if someone has a will, the process is usually pretty simple if it's not contested. If it is contested, it can get a little heated. Hopefully that is not your situation. But the court is going to validate everything. It typically takes about 6 to 18 months, depending on the state that you're in, for this process to settle. And this is important to understand because this means it can delay you getting those assets. Now, if the assets are in something where there is a beneficiary designation, this is exactly what you're hoping for. Beneficiary designations bypass probate completely. So all you're really going to need are copies of the death certificate if you're dealing with a loss. As you know, I would say you probably want to get multiple copies of that because a lot of times different firms will want originals. But then all you're really going to need is that copy of the death certificate. You're going to need to get in touch with a financial firm and just let them know that someone has passed away and that you are the beneficiary of those accounts. They'll get a little bit of required documentation for you, but it's usually pretty simple when they're listed as a beneficiary because it avoids probate completely. Now, why is this also important? Let me tell you a real story. I had a client who had inherited some assets once from a family member. She was really excited about it and she expected to receive a pretty large sum of money. Now, as she was going through this, she skipped these steps despite us talking to her about it. She just always like, oh no, I'm for sure going to be the beneficiary. Well, lo and behold, we get into the process and find out she was not. In fact, this family member had left a section of the assets to a new girlfriend that he had just recently started dating right before he passed away. Needless to say, the client was very unhappy about this and she decided to go to court to fight it. She spent a couple years in courts and then ended up still losing because it was pretty plain as day that this family member of hers had left the other person as the beneficiary of the account. So why do I say all this? Is because all of this could have been avoided. Yeah, I'm sure she wouldn't have been happy to know right away that she wasn't going to inherit everything she thought she was going to. However, it would have saved her years in court, a ton of headache, and it honestly left her a little bit salty and just frustrated about the whole process. So I don't want that to be your story. So step one, start by verifying that the assets are in fact coming to you and how those assets are titled. Now, step two is more just about understanding how taxes are going to apply to your account. There is an important concept known as a step-up in cost basis. What a step-up in cost basis means for non-qualified assets, so think things like real estate, individual stocks, individual mutual funds. When the person passes away and you inherit those assets, you inherit them and they get a step up to their fair market value at death. Let me give you guys an example. Let's say you have a parent who passes away and they bought stocks at $100,000, and when they pass away, they are now worth $1 million. Well, if that family member would have sold the full $1 million while they were still alive, they would have owed taxes on the $900,000 they'd earned in this example. However, with a step up in cost basis, the $100,000 they spent, now they're worth $1 million, their cost basis resets, or it steps up to the fair market value at the time of their death. This is a huge thing for people who are inheriting assets in this way, because what it means is that you are in a very unique position where you can actually change the allocation of what you have, which we'll talk about in a future step, without having to really worry about major tax consequences. So you want to verify if you're taking over qualified or non-qualified assets. Now, qualified assets are going to be things like a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, a 401k, something like that. Why this is important is that these assets do not get a step up in cost basis. Traditional IRAs are still going to be subject to income taxes. Roth IRAs, not as much, but they both do have what's known as a 10-year rule that applies to them. This rule just states that you have to take all those assets out within 10 years of inheriting them. If you do not, there are some substantial, that's a hard thing to say back to back, substantial penalties for not doing so. So it's very important that you understand what type of assets you're inheriting, and then also have a distribution schedule of how you're going to take those. Now, the last thing is that if you are inheriting a large sum of money, now I'm talking $13.61 million or more, you really need to talk with an attorney because there's some very significant tax penalties or tax consequences, probably a better way of saying it, that you need to be aware of. Now, again, the good news with this is that if that is the case, it's almost never that you see an account this size that doesn't have some pretty substantial estate planning already done. So you're probably going to be in a good spot. But if you are that one person out there, if stumbled across this video and that is your situation, please, at a minimum, contact my office, contact an advisor you trust, because there are some very big things you need to be aware of. Now, with step three, we kind of alluded to it already. I think I might have mentioned it in step one, which is gathering the necessary documents. As you're going through this process, you're going to need some things. If you're dealing with a death, like I was saying, you're going to want 10 to 15 copies of the death certificates. You want originals because oftentimes financial institutions are going to want those. If you're going through a divorce, you're going to want copies of the divorce decrees. You're going to want copies of the quadro, like I was just telling you about. Institutions sometimes will keep these when you're going through the process of moving money. And this can be really difficult because if you only have a handful and you're waiting on copies to get back and forth, it can really slow the process down. The other thing I would say is that you're going to want to reach out to the financial institutions. We're going to talk more about this, but there's again a little bit of overlap with these steps. Sometimes firms have their own internal transfer paperwork, especially if you're dealing with qualified assets. So things like 401ks, pension plans, 403bs, sometimes they will have what's known as plan administration paperwork, meaning that they will not accept the transfer paperwork from an outside firm. You actually have to call that firm to get their own internal paperwork. So you're going to want to make sure you notate that, and that's going to kind of tie into our next step, which is step four, where you're going to want to meet with a financial advisor. So with this one, I would say the sooner the better. Now, granted, am I biased on this? Yes, because I do this for a living, but I also see what it can mean to the people who try and handle a lot of this on their own. Now, you are not legally required to work with an advisor. You're not legally required to work with an attorney. You can do it all yourself. There are multiple studies out there that show that working with an advisor does tend to lead to significant higher wealth for the average Main Street American. So if you are in that position, you're trying to decide, hey, should I be working with an advisor? Should I not? I would say talk to them, at least talk to them. Now, if you already have a trusted advisor, that is great. If you are like most Americans where that's not the case, or maybe you're just not sure if your advisor is up to this situation, if you're inheriting a solid amount of money, here's how I would start if I knew what I knew, but I was not in this line of work. I would start by researching that advisor online. So I'd start with Google reviews, their socials. I'd go to all the different things they're posting, whether maybe they have a YouTube presence like this, maybe they have a Facebook presence, maybe they're getting Google reviews. Start there. What I've seen in this industry is that people tend to leave reviews on really good or really bad situations. So if you're seeing someone who has a lot of really good reviews, that's good news. If they have a lot of really bad reviews or saying the same thing over and over, probably not the best thing. Once you have done with that and you've talked to an advisor, and again, let me back up. Maybe you're watching this video and you're like, oh, well, great, I already do have an advisor. What I would say is now is the time, if you're inheriting some significant assets, to really take stock of how this advisor is doing. What's their communication like? How often are you hearing from them? How often are they giving you updates on their portfolio? Are they only handling your investments, or are they talking to you about estate planning, insurance, debt elimination? Is it comprehensive planning, or is it just one section? Why I think this is important, guys, is because yes, investing is important, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. For example, our firm, we'll do what's known as a financial diagnostic. We look at 8 key areas. There's really only 8 areas you have to get right when it comes to your money, or if you get them right, it's almost a slam dunk. You're going to accomplish your long-term financial goals. But if you miss even one of them, it can be catastrophic. So really take heart of how your advisor is doing, and if this is the person that you want to trust with significant assets. If it is, great, move forward. If it's not, start with some research. Totally biased here. Look at my firm, Nexus. We're a great firm. We'd be happy to help you, and yeah, check us out, see what you think. Now, step 5, this is where you're going to want to start initiating the transfer. So if you think about where we've got to so far, we started off by verifying that you are in fact the beneficiary of these accounts. We have then gone through and we have seen how the titles are registered. We've gotten all the documents, and now we've talked about meeting with an advisor. Now you are ready to start moving money into accounts that are registered in your name. For IRAs, you're going to be moving them into what's known as an inherited IRA. For non-qualified assets, you're just going to be rolling them over from the old person's name to your name now. Now, if you are working with an advisory team, we're going to talk a little bit about strategy. I know you're thinking, we haven't even talked about strategy yet. That's actually the next step. Don't worry, we're going to get there. But the advisory team should be helping you with all the movements, okay? And a great team will make this process very, very seamless. However, if you are doing it by yourself, my number one tip to you is that when you call these institutions to start initiating these transfer, take great notes. Okay, so when we call, it's very, very common. We are literally taking notes while we're talking to the person. We're going to ask for the person that we're speaking for their rep ID. We're going to take note of the time that we call, the date that we call. We are going to make sure that we are asking for all forms, anything that they need from us. We are being very, very thorough. Now, why is this happening? I don't know why it is, guys, but sometimes it feels like these financial firms are almost like fighting you to keep you from moving money. And so they kind of make it seem like there's all these different steps you need to take. What I have found is that when I call in and I talk to someone, or someone on my team does it, when I used to do it, now my teammates, when they do it, by taking notes, and when the person knows that you're taking notes, you've got their rep ID, you've got their name, they seem to be more helpful and they seem to be more willing to give you the advice you're actually after. What I've seen happen though too is that when you don't know the questions to ask, it's not uncommon for you to get partial answers. So you may ask the question, but not ask the full question. So they will answer what you have said, but then you may ask them like, hey, what do we need to do to transfer this? I swear to you, I've seen this. They'll say, oh, we need a transfer form to initiate the disbursement. So then you will have the advisory firm send that transfer form only to find out they needed their internal transfer form, or they needed this form with a, to be notarized. There's all these weird little things. So don't get frustrated with that. Be polite, take notes. It's going to save you a ton of time on the back end. And if you have to mail anything, I always try and see if they'll accept an email copy. It's pretty rare they do. No one faxes anything anymore. But when you're sending things, send it certified mail. It's worth spending the $20 to $30 to overnight it where they have to sign for it. Just do that, especially if it's a solid enough amount of money. Just keep that process moving. Now, as you are transferring those assets, sometimes people want to do it in a way where nothing gets sold. What you're going to want to do as you do this is you're going to want to make sure that you request that these assets transfer in kind. So what that means is that they're just going to transfer whatever stocks you have from the old firm to the new firm. This doesn't sell anything. It doesn't generate any taxable consequences, nothing like that. It's just literally moving from company A to company B. If that's what you wanted to do, make sure you request that transfer in kind. Or if you know that you're not going to be sticking with this strategy, you can just liquidate the portfolio and move on from there. Now, as far as step six is make sure you've built the optimized portfolio for your goals. Again, guys, this is one of those situations where people might think, shouldn't we start here? The answer is not really. I've found that this process, when you're moving money from spot A to spot B, a lot of times it takes a couple of weeks. So sometimes it's better just to get the ball rolling. I've also seen that it gives people a little bit of a fire lit underneath them where they're like, hey, I got to figure this out because this money is coming. But now is the time where you're going to want to meet with your advisor and you're going to want to build out, what does your portfolio look like? You're going to want to figure out what your goals are, what the portfolio allocation is that's appropriate for those types of goals, and really just kind of set that out. Now, again, if you don't know where to start, reach out to an advisor that you trust. You can reach out to our team. We do this all the time. I also have a really great risk profile questionnaire. So if you're looking for a good place to start, send me an email, robert@nexuswealthmanagement.org. I'm happy to share that with you, and it will at least get you pointed in the right direction. Now, people will ask at this step, Robert, is it okay for me to sell these assets? Like, sometimes I see clients where it's their dad or their mom, they inherited these assets, they had these stocks, and they're like, I don't know if I should sell this. Is that rude? And here's my answer to that. I think it's almost rude not to. And why I say that, guys, is that where your family members or wherever you inherited these assets from, where they were at in life is very likely not where you're at in life. So the portfolio allocation and recommendations that they had might have been perfect for what they were trying to do, but that doesn't mean it's perfect for you. Think about it like anything else. It's like a one size doesn't fit all type situation. Maybe you inherited assets from a grandfather or a parent who was 20, 30 years older than you, if I guess grandparents more than that. But they're in a different spot in life. So you need to adjust the portfolio according to what's best for you. That might mean making it more aggressive. That might mean making it more conservative, but don't feel like you just have to hold what you've got. My very last tip, which is not really a step, but more of just caution. The caution is, don't blow through it, guys. I know this seems like common sense, but I am telling you, I have seen this happen, not a lot, but more than once. I've seen a couple clients literally blow through their inheritance in just a couple of years. And then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, they have nothing left to show after inheriting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think that's probably the biggest. I think the biggest one I've seen is someone blow through is about $600,000. And so you don't want to be that person. With that said, guys, I know this is a complex process. I tried to hit the main things. I'm sure there's things that we could go more in detail on, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Find an advisor or an attorney you trust. If you don't know where to start, reach out to my team, again, at robert@nexuswealthmanagement.org. We'll be happy to help you. Thank you guys so much for watching this. If you've made it this far, please consider leaving a like. Really helps us out, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. All right, this is something I'm gonna just add in.